Hi, and welcome to week 3 of History of English. This week, we are going to be looking at two topics, the history of writing and the history of corpus linguistics, or corpus linguistics in general. So this is a lecture on history of writing. And so we kind of briefly talked about the differences between speech and writing in last week. So we're going to continue looking at the history of writing because we are not going to be really talking about writing much during the rest of the semester. So I kind of wanted to dedicate this lecture to just writing. We will be talking a great deal about speech and how the spoken form is differed, but not really how the written form is differed. And when you look at writing, you can see that early pieces of writing, I'm not really talking about English at this point, but just writing in general, was invented around 3200 in BC. So there have been different types of writing. And one of the oldest type of writing is the logographic kind of writing forms. And so examples of this kind of writing is the ancient Mesopotamian cuneiform, the Egyptian hieroglyphics, and the Chinese characters. So these are the three kinds of logographic writing. And I'm going to show you examples of this in a minute. This kind of writing, or this kind of graphic pictorial representations of language, is very different from phonographic writing. And so phonographic writing systems are what we use on a daily basis when we write English or any other language that you're familiar with. So the examples of these kind of writings are syllabic writing or alphabetic writing, right? And so alphabetic writing is what we do in English, where you use complex syllable structures like CCVC, CCCVC, etc., consonant, 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 vowel, consonant, consonant, etc. And syllabic writing is relatively simple syllable structures where you have just CVC or just CVC, etc., where the syllable structures are rather simple. Then there's also a system called the Abjad system, which is what Arabic and Hebrew use. They basically just have a templatic kind of format. There are different consonants, and then these can combine with different vowels to create different sounds and different meaning. And then you also have the Abugida system, which is Hindi. So when I was growing up, I wrote both in the English kind of systems, the alphabetic writing, but with just writing the Roman alphabet when I was learning English. But I also learned the Abugida system of writing. So this is the Hindi Urdu writing system, which is different from the writing system of my mother tongue, Malayalam. So I grew up writing three different scripts: English, the Hindi Urdu Abugida system, as well as my Malayalam script, which is completely different and not mutually interchangeable between Hindi and Malayalam. So there are different kinds of scripts. And this is what the early piece of writing looked like. This is a tablet that has been uncovered using archaeological techniques. This is a tablet from the 4th millennium, and this was found in this place called Uruk. And what it does is, if I don't know how much you can see in the video, but if you kind of zoom in and see this tablet, you can see that these are actually grains and heads of cattle. That's what this is actually representing. So each of these small tablets represented a piece of cattle and a sack of grain. So it kind of kept tab of how many grains of sack and how many cattle you had, which was all you had to really keep track of those days. So this is one of the early pieces of writing. And as you can see, there isn't really any text, or there isn't really any word that you can discern from this, but it's more graphical and pictorial in representation. These are clay tokens, and as you can see again, they are very pictorial and graphic in representation. And these used to be used as accounting devices. So again, to keep tab of how many sacks of grain you had, what kinds of grains you had, what kinds of cattle and other kinds of domesticated animals you had. And these were used in the Mediterranean kind of places as early as 8,000 before Christ, and more commonly by 4,000. So even though it existed 4,000 years prior to 4,000 BC, they became very commonly used by 4,000 BC. So here is an example of a pictograph. This is a picture dictionary, as you can see. These are very commonly used by a lot of indigenous languages in America as well, not a lot of Native American languages. You can see these when people excavate old caves and old kind of settlements. You can see these in caves, on the walls of the caves, for example. They're actually drawn with like a sharp a rock or a kind of instrument that's being created in those era. So you can see that a lot of these are pretty intuitive. Like when you look at the sun, for example, you can, I mean, even without me telling you what this is, you understand that that's a sun, right? And then you probably could also have guessed man and woman and boy and girl, etc. So a lot of these pictorial kind of representations are quite intuitive. We still continue to use pictographs, and a classic example of this is road signs, roadside services, for example. There are a lot of these are pictographic. So like gas station or disabled friendly. This is a rest area. This is a hospital service, etc. So a lot of these kind of roadside services may not really have any text or word associated with it, except like information or police or something, but a lot of the others are just pictographic in nature. And so when you see the photograph of a telephone, you actually know that, okay, there's access to a telephone and you can use that service if needed. One of the earliest pictographic writing is the Chinese writing. And if you have seen Chinese being written, or if you have taken a class in Mandarin Chinese, you know that it's not exactly the easiest writing system to learn, right? I mean, not just the fact that Chinese has all these complicated tonal system, but also the writing is not really easy. But this is one of the earliest form of that writing system. And this writing was called as the oracle bone script, and this was inscribed on a tortoise shell or an ox bone during the 1600,000 BC, during the Shang dynasty. And these are again very similar to the picture dictionary pictures of pictographic symbols that we actually saw earlier. This then gave rise to Chinese calligraphy, which begin to look a lot more like the Chinese writing system, the current writing system. But now you can see that they've gone from a pictographic kind of representation to what is more of a logophoric representation or an ideographic representation. They're not really pictures anymore. If I don't tell you what each of these symbols stand for, you have no idea what the scripture actually stands for. So this kind of writing is ideographic or logographic. Now, we're moving on from the pictographic logographic representation to the more commonly used scripts currently, the syllabic writing. Syllabic writing or phonographic writing is rather new. So the older versions are logographic and pictographic. And this kind of phonographic syllabic writing was started in Sumeria around 600 years after phonographic writing was used. So this is the first evidence that we have of syllables and syllabic structure. So it moved from more graphic representations of meaning into a more syllabic representation. So meaning started being represented in smaller speech units and smaller speech sounds. So here is an example of one of the first syllabic kind of words. This is Kir. It's the meaning of Kir is a female lamb, and as you can see, it still looks a great deal like it's pictographic, right, or logographic, but each of these stand for a syllable. So the top one stands for ki, the bottom one stands for etc. So each of these can be associated with a particular syllable, with a particular speech sound, and therefore connected to meaning. here is the Sumerian writing for beer. This word is kash, and this is how they represented beer. The basis of the alphabetic writing that we use currently is Semitic writing. And like I said, Semitic is the Abjad's system of writing, and it was called as Phoenician. That was that was a term that was given to this writing system by the Greeks. The idea behind this writing system is that it's a templatic morphology format. So you had consonants in this writing system, not really any vowels, and then they borrowed, the Greeks borrowed this kind of writing system, this templatic morphology, to create the alphabet as we know it. So this was how the first iteration of the alphabet looked like. This is the Greek alphabet, and Greek wrote from right side to left side, right? Not from left to right. So as you can see, when you look at the right-hand corner, you can see alpha, A, B, gamma, delta, A, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, and then so on and so forth from right to left. So this version of the alphabet was called as the Ionic Greek alphabet. And this was, like I said, the first iteration of the alphabet. And as you can see, many of US sororities and fraternities still use a lot of these symbols and still use a lot of these names. But this was the first alphabet as we know it. This gave rise then to the Roman alphabet, and the Roman alphabet looks slightly different, again read from right to left. So A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, and X, right? So this was how the Roman alphabet looked like. And again, you can see there's a lot of similarity between A, B, C, maybe D, E, F. I was called a Z at that point, and not as I. That was a later kind of development. So there's a lot of similarity between what we write today and the first iteration of the Roman alphabet. There were a lot of changes in the Roman alphabet from the Greek alphabet that they based their alphabet on. Some of the major changes was the curving. So the gamma curved into more of a C shape, like that curvature kind of happened from the Greek to the Roman alphabet. And then there was a rounding of the delta. So the triangle, right, which was the D, became more of a D like that. So it became more of a rounding. Pi, again, P from pi, S from sigma, etc. So there was a lot of changes with respect to curvature between the Greek alphabet and the Roman alphabet. Some more changes that happened was there was some borrowing that happened from Cyrillic and the Slavic alphabet, and these were all the diacritics that you see, like the ch, the a, and the umlaut from Germanic languages like u and o, etc. And also some developments that took place from the runic letters, the thorn, the win, and the et symbol, which you will see quite a bit in the Old English and towards the beginning of Middle English. So I suggest that you keep a note of these three symbols, the thorn symbol, the win symbol, and the et symbol, because you will see it in text when we look at Old English data. So it will be useful to keep this in mind, that these are actually runic letters pronounced as the th, the z, and the ed. Now, English, remember that we started talking briefly about English in the last class, but English really did not originate in England. It came from the European mainland, from different tribes that migrated from European mainland into the English island. And one of the things that happened along with that was the coming of Germanic tribes, right? Germanic languages. And so all these kind of new runic letters came into the English language. It's often called as futhorc, f, u, s, o, k, g, w. All these different sounds came into the English alphabet from Germanic. So there's a lot of Germanic influence in writing in the English language. The Anglo-Saxon Roman alphabet, or the advent of Christianity, really brought about the Roman alphabet into the English islands. And the early Old English manuscripts were written in what is known as Insular Hand, which is an Irish modification of the Roman alphabet. So the differences in the Insular Hand is a digraph ash, like the A symbol. So you can actually see this in Old English text. It will be written with the A, and along with all the sounds that we just mentioned before, the runic symbols. And in the 1066, when we talk about the Norman conquest, the differences between the Old English text and the Middle English text, you will see the starting of all these different kinds of sounds like ch, f, th, g, sh, w, etc. All these kind of sound combinations came about with the advent of French and other Norman languages that came into England during the 1066 AD. Now, obviously, I don't need to kind of talk a lot about this because it's quite familiar to people who speak English and teach English, that English orthography is completely bizarre, right? I mean, if you're teaching English as a second language, if you're a learner of English, you completely know that English's orthography there's no one-on-one mapping. So, for example, there are some sounds or letters that are not represented by any phonemes in a particular word, like through, right? The GH is not pronounced. Sign, the G is not pronounced. Give, the E is not pronounced at the end, and palm, the L is not pronounced. And then there are a group of 2 or more letters that can be used to represent a single phoneme, like think, the th is represented by TH, ship, the sh is represented by S and H, and philosophy, the P and H is represented phonetically as F, which is why I often tell my students in 315 and 317 that we need to completely rethink the way we are teaching English phonetics in classes, in elementary education, in middle school, because we don't want to be teaching phonics. We need to be teaching phonetics. There's a difference, right? I mean, phonics represents how do you read this? How do you write this? But phonetics has to do with, well, forget the spelling. Spelling really doesn't matter. But what really matters is how you actually produce and pronounce this particular word. So when you look at the phonetic transcription of each of these words, for example, you can understand why there isn't that one-on-one kind of mapping I referred to. And if you want to get some practice in IPA, if you want to refresh your memory in doing IPA, feel free to transcribe each of these words into IPA so that you will kind of refresh your memory with the IPA chart. Some more problems of English orthography is that when you have saxophone, for example, in phonetic transcription, it's written by 2 or more letters. So the X is actually K and an S, same with exile. And then the same letter can represent different phonemes in different words like on, bone, sun, and one. It's all written as an O, but these are all different phonemes when you transcribe this into IPA. So I'm going to leave you in this lecture with this poem called Language Matters, and I will give you a minute to read this. It's just a hilarious poem representing or talking about how English's orthography and English's spelling is just completely like, idiosyncratic and completely arbitrary. And in class, if this was an in-class, I would be giving you time to do this activity, but because this is an online class, I want you to do this at home. These are different words that are derived from one another, so hymn and hymnal, part and partial, etc. And I kind of want you to talk about how the English orthography changes with respect to these morphophonemic kind of alterations. So to do this, you will have to transcribe each of the words into IPA and kind of talk about the phonetic change that actually happens between hymn and hymnal, etc. So this will be a really good exercise, A, in reviewing IPA, but also in reviewing morphology and the kind of phonetic, the terminology that we use to talk about phonetics and morphology. All right, so that's what I had to tell you about the history of writing. I will see you in the next lecture, which is on corpus linguistics.